Wild Stallion finds a rancher tied in the Badlands. What happened next amazed everyone. The Badlands stretched wide and silent under the open sky, a place where the land looked endless but could turn dangerous without warning. Sharp rocks cut through the soil, dry winds carried dust for miles, and the sun ruled the day without mercy. People who lived near this land respected it deeply. They knew it could feed them, guide them, or take everything away if they were careless. The rancher had grown up near these lands. He was not a reckless man. Years of working cattle, fixing fences, and riding long hours had taught him patience and caution. He knew the Badlands better than most. He knew which paths were safe, where the ground could collapse, and where water sometimes gathered after rain. That morning, he left his ranch just after sunrise, planning to check a distant section of land where a fence had been damaged days earlier. His horse was calm, his supplies light but enough for the day. The sky was clear and the air felt still. Nothing suggested trouble. Before leaving, he promised his family he would be back before dark. It was a promise he had kept many times before. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became stronger. The rancher moved slowly, conserving energy, guiding his horse carefully through narrow trails and rocky slopes. He repaired parts of the fence, took notes of broken posts, and drank small sips of water. Time passed quietly. The Badlands swallowed sound, leaving only the wind and the soft steps of the horse. By late afternoon, clouds gathered far away, not enough to bring rain, but enough to shift the air. The rancher decided to head back. He turned his horse toward home, choosing a familiar route that cut across a dry valley. It was a shortcut he had used before, but the Badlands never stayed the same. Wind and erosion changed the ground constantly, hiding risks under a familiar surface. As he rode through the valley, something unexpected happened. The horse stumbled. The ground beneath gave way slightly, not enough to collapse fully, but enough to throw both rider and horse off balance. The rancher fell hard. Pain shot through his body, sharp and sudden. The horse bolted a few steps before stopping, confused and frightened. The rancher tried to stand but felt a deep pain in his side and leg. He checked himself slowly. Nothing seemed broken, but moving was difficult. Worse still, his horse had panicked. The animal backed away, then turned and ran, disappearing between the rocks and dust before the rancher could call it back. Now alone, the rancher stayed calm. Panic would only waste strength. He rested for a moment, breathing slowly, waiting for the pain to ease. He believed the horse would return. It had always done so before, but minutes turned into an hour and the horse did not come back. The sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the valley. The rancher decided he needed to move. Staying exposed overnight could be dangerous. He gathered his strength and tried to walk, using a nearby rock for support. Every step hurt, but he forced himself forward, hoping to reach higher ground where he could see better. As he moved, he noticed signs that made him uneasy. The area felt wrong. Tracks in the dust did not belong to cattle or wildlife he recognized. Something about them seemed fresh. He slowed down, scanning the land carefully. Before he could react, figures appeared from behind the rocks. They moved fast, silent, and coordinated. The rancher barely had time to raise his hands before he was surrounded. He was pulled off balance and forced to the ground. His attempts to speak were ignored. His supplies were taken, his water removed, and his hands restrained. The Badlands returned to silence just as quickly as it had been broken. When the figures left, the rancher was alive but helpless, tied and left behind under the open sky. The sun dipped lower and the air grew cooler. He tested his restraints, but they held firm. He knew shouting would do little good. Sound did not travel far in the Badlands, and night creatures would hear him before people did. As darkness approached, far away at the ranch, concern began to grow. The rancher was never late. His family noticed the sun touching the horizon and the empty trail leading home. At first, They believed he might have stopped to help a neighbor or check cattle longer than planned. But when full darkness arrived and still there was no sign of him, worry settled deep. His family stepped outside, scanning the distance. The land offered no answers. The wind carried only dust and silence. By morning, neighbors were alerted. A small group gathered, experienced ranch hands who understood the Badlands well. They studied tracks near the fence line and found signs of a struggle near the valley. The horses' tracks were there, wild and uneven, but the rancher's trail vanished abruptly. The group searched carefully, spreading out but staying within sight of one another. Hours passed under the rising sun, but they found nothing more. No clear direction, no voice answering their calls. As the day wore on, something strange caught their attention. A wild stallion stood on a ridge in the distance. He was known in the area, a powerful animal with a dark coat and sharp eyes. He avoided people and had never been seen near the ranch before. That day, however, he did not run. He stood still, watching the land below, his ears alert, his body tense. When the search group moved, the stallion moved too, not toward them, but along the ridge, pacing as if following something unseen. No one yet understood that the story was no longer only about a missing man. Somewhere deep in the Badlands, as the tired rancher endured heat, thirst, and fading strength, another presence was drawing closer. The land was preparing to reveal a moment that would leave everyone who witnessed it amazed. The night passed slowly for the rancher. The stars above him were bright, but they offered no comfort. The ground beneath his back was cold and hard, and every small movement sent pain through his body. His mouth was dry and his thoughts came in slow waves. He focused on breathing, counting each breath to stay calm. Panic would only make things worse. As the first light of morning touched the Badlands, the rancher opened his eyes again. The land looked different in daylight. What had seemed silent and empty at night now revealed sharp rocks, winding paths, and distant ridges. He tested the ropes around his wrists once more. They were still tight. He knew he had to save his strength. The sun would soon rise higher and heat would return. Not far away, a wild stallion stood alone. The stallion had lived his entire life avoiding humans. He trusted his instincts more than anything else. He knew where water could sometimes be found, where grass survived, and where danger waited. That morning, something unusual pulled his attention toward the valley. A scent carried by the wind did not belong to animals or plants. It was unfamiliar, mixed with fear and pain. The stallion lifted his head, ears turning forward. He stood still for a long moment, listening. The land spoke to him in ways humans could not hear. A faint sound reached him, not loud but wrong. It was the sound of strained breathing. Slowly, cautiously, the stallion moved toward the source. He stepped carefully between rocks, his hooves silent against the dry earth. Every few steps he stopped, scanned the area and listened again. He was alert, ready to run if danger appeared, but nothing chased him away. The closer he came, the stronger the scent became. When he finally saw the rancher, the stallion froze. The man lay on the ground, tied and unmoving. His skin was pale under the sun, his eyes half open. The stallion had seen humans before, always from a distance. They rode horses, built fences, and carried tools. But he had never seen one like this, helpless, silent, and alone. Instinct told the stallion to turn away. Humans brought risk, but another instinct held him there. The stallion took a slow step closer. The rancher noticed movement and forced his eyes open wider. At first, fear rushed through him. A large animal stood nearby, powerful and free. But as their eyes met, something unexpected happened. The stallion did not charge. He did not flee. He stood quietly, breathing steadily, watching the man. The rancher swallowed hard. His voice was weak, barely more than a breath. He spoke softly, not trying to command, not trying to scare. Just a simple sound, a calm tone meant for horses he had worked with his entire life. The stallion flicked an ear. He did not understand the words, but he felt the tone. Minutes passed. The sun climbed higher. Heat pressed down on both of them. The stallion shifted his weight and moved closer again, careful not to step too near. He circled once, then stopped beside a nearby rock, watching. As the day continued, danger approached in quiet ways. Small creatures moved closer, curious. The stallion reacted instantly. He stamped his hooves and lifted his head high, driving them away. He positioned himself between the rancher and the open land as if guarding him. The rancher noticed this and felt something stir inside him, hope. Hours passed. The stallion remained. When the rancher's breathing became shallow, the stallion stepped closer again, lowering his head, watching for signs of life. The animal's shadow offered brief relief from the sun as it moved with the hours. When the rancher struggled and groaned, the stallion responded with soft sounds of his own. Not loud, not aggressive, just presence. As afternoon came, the stallion did something unexpected. He lifted his head and looked toward the distant ridges, then back at the rancher. His muscles tightened. Suddenly he turned and ran. The rancher's heart sank. He thought the stallion had left him, but the stallion did not go far. He reached a high ridge and stopped. From there he could see far across the Badlands. He stood tall and still, a dark shape against the sky. Then he let out a powerful sound, loud and clear, echoing across the land. Far away, the search party paused. They had been moving slowly, checking valleys and ridges. Water supplies were low and hope was fading. When they heard the sound, they looked up. One of them pointed toward the ridge. "That horse again," someone said. The stallion moved along the ridge, stopping and calling out again. Then he paced back and forth, refusing to leave the spot. The searchers exchanged glances. Horses did not act like that without reason. They adjusted their direction and followed. Back in the valley, the stallion returned to the rancher. He stood close again, as if to say he had not abandoned him. The rancher barely noticed. His strength was fading, but he felt less alone. As the sun began to lower, the sound of distant voices reached the valley. The stallion lifted his head sharply. He stood tall and alert. Moments later, human figures appeared on the ridge. The stallion did not run. He stayed. The searchers rushed forward, stunned by what they saw. The tied rancher alive. The wild stallion standing guard beside him. They worked quickly, freeing the rancher and giving him water. As they lifted him carefully, the stallion stepped back, watching closely. When the rancher was safe in their hands, the stallion turned toward the open land. Before leaving, he paused and looked back once more. Then he disappeared into the Badlands, leaving behind a silence filled with awe. What the stallion had done could not be explained by training or habit. It was instinct, loyalty, and something deeper that no one could put into words. The story of that day would spread far beyond the Badlands, leaving everyone who heard it amazed. The journey back from the Badlands was slow and careful. The rancher drifted in and out of awareness as he was carried on a stretcher made from blankets and poles. Every movement sent pain through his body, but the sound of familiar voices kept him grounded. He knew he was no longer alone. He knew he had been found. When they reached the ranch, his family rushed forward. Relief washed over their faces when they saw his chest rising and falling. He was taken inside, given water in small amounts, and allowed to rest. A local doctor arrived later that evening and checked him carefully. The injuries were serious but not life-ending. With time and care, he would heal. As the rancher slept, the story of the rescue began to spread. The searchers talked quietly among themselves at first, still trying to understand what they had seen. A wild stallion, known for keeping distance from people, had stayed near a helpless man and led them to him. No one could remember seeing anything like it. Horses were smart, yes, but this felt different. It felt deliberate. By the next morning, neighbors arrived to check on the rancher. Some brought food, others brought supplies, all brought questions. They gathered near the porch, speaking in low voices, glancing toward the Badlands as if expecting the stallion to appear again. The rancher woke later that day, weak but aware. His family sat beside him. When they asked what he remembered, his voice was quiet and slow but clear. He spoke of the fall, of being left behind, of the long night under the stars. Then he spoke of the stallion. As he described the animal standing near him, guarding him, the room fell silent. He explained how the stallion stayed through the heat, how it chased away danger, how it left and returned. When he finished, no one spoke for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved softly through the grass. In the days that followed, the rancher rested and slowly regained strength. Each day, he asked to sit by the window. From there, he could see the open land stretching toward the Badlands. He watched the horizon, half expecting to see a dark shape standing on a ridge. The stallion did return. One early morning, a ranch hand noticed movement near the far fence line. He shaded his eyes and stared. There, standing still against the rising sun, was the wild stallion. He did not cross onto the ranch land. He did not run. He simply stood, watching. Word spread quickly. People stepped outside quietly, careful not to spook him. The stallion lifted his head, ears alert, but stayed where he was. After a few minutes, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the land as calmly as he had arrived. This became a pattern. Every few days, the stallion appeared, always at a distance, always watching, never approaching too close. The rancher heard about it each time. When he was strong enough, he asked to be helped outside so he could see for himself. One afternoon, supported by his family, the rancher stood on the porch. His body was still weak, but his eyes were sharp. Far away, near a familiar ridge, the stallion stood. The rancher did not wave. He did not call out. He simply stood there, breathing slowly. After a long moment, the stallion lowered his head once, then turned and walked away. The rancher felt something settle inside him. News of the event spread beyond the local area. People from nearby towns came to hear the story. Some were curious. Some were doubtful. Others were deeply moved. They wanted to know if it was true, if a wild animal had truly stayed with a man and guided rescuers to him. The searchers told the story the same way every time. They did not exaggerate. They did not add drama. They simply told what they had seen. The stallion's actions spoke for themselves. A few people suggested capturing the stallion, believing he might be special or valuable. The idea was discussed briefly, then firmly rejected. The rancher spoke clearly on the matter. "He saved my life," he said. "He doesn't belong to anyone." The land itself seemed to agree. Weeks passed. The rancher grew stronger. He returned to light work, careful and patient. He moved slower now, more aware of each step. The Badlands had always demanded respect, but now that respect ran deeper. One day, while checking a fence near the edge of the land, the rancher saw the stallion again. This time, the distance between them was shorter than ever before. The stallion stood still, watching. The rancher stopped walking. The wind moved between them. Dust swirled softly at their feet. Slowly, the rancher placed a hand over his chest and bowed his head slightly. It was not a gesture he had learned. It came naturally. The stallion watched, then turned sideways, showing trust before stepping back. They shared that moment without sound. As seasons changed, the story became part of local memory. Parents told it to their children. Ranchers spoke of it during long evenings. It was not told as a tale of luck, but as a reminder. The land listens. Life responds in ways people do not always understand. The stallion was seen less often as time passed, but he never vanished completely. Sometimes his tracks appeared near water sources. Sometimes his silhouette appeared briefly on a ridge at sunrise or sunset. Each time, people paused and watched, feeling something quiet and powerful. The rancher never tried to follow him. He understood now that some bonds were not meant to be owned or explained. They were meant to be respected. Years later, when asked about that day, the rancher would speak simply. He would say the Badlands tested him, and he survived because something wild chose to stand beside him. He would smile softly and look toward the horizon. And somewhere out there, beyond fences and roads, a stallion continued to roam free, carrying a story that amazed everyone who heard it, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was true. Life slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but nothing felt quite the same anymore. The rancher woke each morning with gratitude that surprised him. Simple things felt heavier with meaning: the sound of boots on the porch, the smell of dust after wind, the quiet presence of cattle grazing under the open sky. He had lived this life for decades, yet now every day felt like a gift that could have been taken away. His body continued to heal, though some pain stayed. It reminded him to move carefully, to listen to his limits. The doctor advised rest, but the rancher knew healing was not only about the body. It was also about understanding what had happened and what it meant. People kept coming. Some arrived with kind words and food. Others came only to hear the story again. They asked the same questions, hoping for details that might explain the unexplainable. Why did the stallion stay? How did he know to lead the searchers? Was it coincidence or something more? The rancher answered patiently. He never added extra details. He never tried to make the story bigger than it was. "I don't know why," he always said. "I only know what happened." That honesty made people listen even more closely. One afternoon, a small group from a nearby town arrived with notebooks and cameras. They wanted to record the story. They asked the rancher to stand where he had been found, to point to the ridge where the stallion had stood. The rancher agreed but asked for one thing. "No chasing him," he said quietly. "No trying to corner him," they promised. The group followed him to the edge of the Badlands. The land looked calm that day, almost gentle. Wind moved through dry grass and clouds drifted slowly across the sky. It was hard to imagine fear and helplessness in such a place. The rancher stopped near the valley and pointed to the spot. "That's where I was," he said. His voice stayed steady, but his hands tightened slightly. "And that ridge there, that's where he stood." The group took notes, snapped pictures, and whispered among themselves. They waited for hours, hoping the stallion would appear. He did not. Some looked disappointed, but the rancher felt relief. The stallion was not a display. He was part of the land, and the land decided when he would be seen. As weeks passed, something else began to change. The rancher noticed people treating the Badlands differently. They rode slower. They checked weather more carefully. They traveled in pairs instead of alone. The story had reminded everyone that strength did not mean control and experience did not mean safety. The rancher himself made changes too. He avoided shortcuts. He carried extra water. He marked risky areas more clearly. These were small actions, but they mattered. One evening, while sitting on the porch, the rancher noticed movement in the distance. The stallion stood on a far ridge, his shape dark against the setting sun. The rancher did not call out. He did not stand. He simply watched. The stallion lowered his head as if grazing, then lifted it again. For a moment, the rancher felt the same calm he had felt in the valley, a sense of being seen, not judged. The stallion turned and walked away. That night, the rancher slept deeply. In the months that followed, the story reached places the rancher had never been. Letters arrived from strangers. Some thanked him for sharing. Others told stories of their own, moments when animals had acted in ways that saved lives or offered comfort. The rancher read each letter carefully. He answered a few. Most he kept quietly. One letter stayed with him. It was short and simple. "Thank you for reminding us that kindness exists in unexpected places." The rancher folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. There were moments of doubt too. Some people questioned the story. They suggested the stallion's actions were coincidence. Others believed the searchers would have found the rancher anyway. The rancher did not argue. He had learned that truth did not need defending. He knew what he had felt on that ground. He knew what he had seen. Late one afternoon, while checking a water source near the edge of the land, the rancher noticed fresh tracks. Large, strong, familiar. He followed them carefully until he saw the stallion standing near a shallow pool. The distance between them was closer than ever before. The stallion noticed him immediately. They stood still, facing one another. The wind was gentle, carrying familiar scents. The rancher removed his hat and held it at his side. He did not step forward. After a long moment, the stallion took one step closer, then another. His posture was calm, not tense. The rancher's heart beat faster, but he stayed still. The stallion stopped just a few steps away. They looked at each other in silence. No fear, no command, just awareness. The stallion lowered his head briefly, then turned sideways and stepped back. He did not linger. He walked away at an easy pace, glancing back once before disappearing behind the rocks. The rancher let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He did not follow. As the year turned, the story became part of the land's identity. Newcomers heard it soon after arriving. Old-timers spoke of it with quiet respect. It was no longer just about a rescue. It was about balance, about how life could meet life in moments of need. The rancher never sought attention. He turned down invitations to speak publicly. He preferred to work, to care for his land, to live quietly. That choice earned him even more respect. On certain mornings, when the light was just right, people claimed they saw the stallion watching from afar. Other days, there was no sign at all. Either way, the land felt different, less owned, more shared. The rancher understood that some moments were meant to pass through a life, not define it. Yet this one had changed how he saw everything. Strength could be gentle. Help could come without words. And sometimes, survival came not from control, but from connection. As another season approached, the rancher stood once more at the edge of the Badlands. He looked out across the land that had tested him and spared him. He placed his hand over his chest, not in pain, but in thanks. Somewhere beyond his sight, a wild stallion moved freely, carrying on as he always had. And though they would never walk side by side, the bond between them remained, quiet, unseen, and unbroken. Time continued to move forward, steady and quiet, just like the land itself. Seasons passed, bringing changes that were small but meaningful. The grass grew and faded, winds shifted, and the Badlands remained strong and patient. The rancher grew older too, though his steps stayed careful and his eyes sharp. What happened that day never left him, but it no longer felt heavy. Instead, it felt like something carried gently inside his chest. He returned fully to his work, not because he had forgotten, but because he understood life had to continue. Each fence he fixed, each animal he checked, each long ride across open land reminded him how close he had come to losing it all. He no longer rushed. He listened more to the weather, to the ground beneath his boots, and to his own instincts. People still spoke about the story, though with time the excitement softened into respect. It became something locals shared quietly rather than loudly. Visitors who heard it often expected drama, but those who truly listened understood it was not about excitement. It was about awareness. One afternoon, a young ranch hand asked the rancher a simple question while they worked side by side. "Do you think he knew what he was doing?" the young man asked. "The stallion." The rancher paused before answering. He wiped his hands on his jeans and looked out toward the open land. "I think he knew enough," he said, "more than we usually give credit for." That answer stayed with the young man long after. Years later, the rancher began spending more time at home. His family noticed he enjoyed sitting on the porch at sunrise and sunset, watching the light move across the land. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he didn't. He never looked bored, he looked peaceful. On one quiet evening, when the sky burned orange and gold, a familiar shape appeared far away. The stallion stood on a ridge, older now, his movements slower but still proud. His coat was touched with lighter shades, signs of time passing. The rancher felt his breath catch, not with surprise but with recognition. They looked at each other across the distance, just as they had many times before. No sound passed between them. None was needed. The stallion stood still for a long moment, then lowered his head as if acknowledging the rancher one last time. Then he turned and walked away. The rancher knew deep inside that this was different. He did not feel sadness. He felt completion. The stallion was not seen again after that. Some said he moved deeper into the Badlands. Others believed he lived out his days quietly where no one could follow. The rancher never searched. He believed that some stories did not need an ending people could witness. As time went on, the rancher shared the story less often, not because he forgot, but because it had become part of who he was. Those who knew him well noticed small changes in how he lived. He left water out during dry seasons. He avoided disturbing wild paths. He taught younger ranchers to respect distance rather than conquer it. "This land doesn't belong to us," he would say. "We're just here for a while." One day, a group of schoolchildren visited the ranch as part of a learning trip. They listened as the rancher spoke about the land, about safety, and about paying attention. One child raised a hand and asked the question everyone eventually asked. "Was the horse your friend?" The rancher smiled softly. "He was," he said, "but not the kind of friend you keep. The kind you thank." The children nodded, even if they did not fully understand. As the rancher grew older, he walked less but watched more. The Badlands still stretched wide, still powerful, still unpredictable, but they no longer felt threatening. They felt honest. When the rancher passed away years later, the community gathered quietly. There were no grand speeches, just shared memories and calm understanding. People spoke of his kindness, his patience, and the story that had taught them all something important. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a single set of tracks was found near the ridge where the stallion had once stood. They were faint, almost faded, and some believed they belonged to another animal passing through. Others believed differently. No one argued. The land accepted the moment without explanation, just as it always had. The story lived on, not as a tale of amazement, but as a reminder that help can come from unexpected places, that survival sometimes depends on listening rather than fighting. And that respect between lives, even very different ones, can change everything. Long after those who witnessed it were gone, the Badlands remained. Wind still moved through the grass. Stars still filled the sky. And somewhere in the quiet memory of the land, the moment when a wild stallion chose to stand beside a helpless man continued to echo, soft, steady, and true.